The call came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in February. I know the exact time because I just looked at the clock on the microwave when I heard my phone buzz on the kitchen counter. I was standing there in my socks waiting for the kettle to boil, thinking about nothing in particular. That's how fast things change. One second you're thinking about nothing, and the next second your whole chest tightens up. It was my brother. Not to check in. Not to chat. My brother hadn't called me just to chat in probably 6 or 7 years. He called because our father had fallen. Dad is 77 years old. He lives alone in the same house in Sudbury he's lived in for 41 years. The house where my brother and I grew up, where Mom used to make butter tarts every Sunday, where the back step still creaks in the same spot it always did. He's stubborn and independent and proud in the way that men of his generation tend to be, and he refuses to move closer to either of us, refuses to talk about assisted living, refuses to hear any of it. So we do what we can from where we are. I drive up every few weeks. I call him every couple of days. I mail him the crossword magazines he likes because he doesn't trust online shopping. That night, Dad had gotten up to use the washroom and slipped on the bathroom floor. He'd been lying there for a while before he managed to drag himself to his phone. He called my brother first. My brother lives 40 minutes from Dad. I'm just over 2 hours away, outside of Barrie. My brother told me Dad sounded confused and was having trouble getting up on his own. He said he thought Dad might have hurt his hip. Then he said, and I remember this clearly, he said, "I've had a couple drinks tonight, Neil. I don't think I should be driving." I stood there in my kitchen in my socks. "So what are you saying?" I asked him. "I'm saying maybe you should call him. Figure something out. Call an ambulance or whatever." I said, "You're 40 minutes away." He said, "I told you, I've had a few." I didn't say anything for a moment. I was doing the math in my head. 2 hours and 15 minutes to Sudbury on a good night. February highway, dark. And Dad on a bathroom floor, 77 years old, possible hip injury, alone. "Call him," I said. "Tell him I'm coming. Stay on the phone with him until I get there." I hung up and went to the bedroom doorway. My daughter-in-law was watching something on her laptop with her headphones on. She and my son have been living with me since last spring. They're saving for a house. My son works rotating shifts at the plant, and he was on nights that week. My truck was in the shop. Had been since Monday. Something with the front axle that was costing me more than I wanted to think about. I knocked on the doorframe. She pulled one headphone off and looked at me. I told her what happened. I told her Dad had fallen, that I needed to get to Sudbury, that my truck was at Kowalski's, and I needed to borrow the CRV. She looked at me. Then she looked back at the screen. "Can't you just call 911 for him?" she said. I said I would call 911 on the road, but I needed to get there, and I needed the car. She said, "It's late, Neil, and I have work in the morning." I stood there in the doorframe. "I'm not asking you to drive," I said. "I'm asking to borrow the car." She said, "That's my car." And then she put the headphone back on. I stood there for maybe 3 full seconds. I thought about a lot of things in those 3 seconds. I thought about the fact that she and my son have been living in my house, in the spare room, using my internet and my washer and my heating, since April. I thought about the fact that I have never once asked them for anything. Not rent, not contribution to groceries, nothing. I thought about my father on a bathroom floor in Sudbury. Then I walked to the kitchen, picked up my phone, called my father's neighbor Gord. Gord is in his late 60s, retired, good man, the kind of neighbor people don't seem to have anymore. I hated calling him at midnight, but I called him. Gord answered on the second ring. When I told him what was happening, he said, "I'll be over there in 2 minutes." I said, "Gord, I'm so sorry to." He said, "Don't be foolish. I'll call you when I get in." I booked a one-way car rental from a 24-hour location in Barrie, called a cab to get there, and stood on my own front porch in my coat waiting for it. It was -18. I could see my breath. I stood out there because I didn't want to go back inside. The cab came. I got in. The driver didn't say much, which I appreciated. Gord called me when I was halfway to the rental place. He'd gotten into the house with the spare key Dad keeps under a ceramic frog by the back door. I'd told him where it was, and Dad was sitting up, lucid, embarrassed, a little shaken. Gord thought the hip might be bruised, but probably not broken. He was going to drive Dad to Health Sciences North himself. I told Gord I didn't know how to thank him. He said, "You don't need to. Just drive safe." I picked up the rental, a Nissan that smelled like air freshener and had someone's Tim Hortons receipt on the floor, and I got on Highway 400 North. The roads were dry, but it was cold and dark, and the kind of quiet that highways get in the middle of winter nights in this province. Just me and the hum of the heater, and the occasional set of headlights going the other way. I called the hospital when I was about an hour out. They confirmed Dad had been brought in. They couldn't tell me much over the phone. I said I was his son, and I was on my way. I thought about a lot of things on that drive. I thought about my father's hands, how they used to look when he was working, big and capable. I thought about the way he smells, the same soap he's used my whole life. I thought about a Saturday years ago when I was maybe 9, and I fell off my bike on the gravel road out front, and he sat with me on the step for a long time after, not saying anything. Just there. I don't know why I thought about that specifically. I just did. I didn't think about my daughter-in-law much. I was too busy driving. I got to Sudbury at 10 after 2 in the morning. I parked and went in through emergency. It was quiet. That particular waiting room quiet that feels different from all other kinds of quiet. Fluorescent lights, a few people in plastic chairs, a TV on low in the corner. A man asleep against the wall with his coat over him like a blanket. A nurse pointed me to Dad's bay. He was lying in a hospital bed looking smaller than I was used to him looking, which always hits me somewhere specific every time. He had a bruise coming up along his hip, and they were waiting on imaging to rule out a fracture. But he was alert, and he was himself. He reached out and grabbed my arm when I came in, and he held on for a second before he let go. "You drove all the way up," he said. "Course I did," I said. "Your truck's in the shop. I rented one." He looked at me. "Where's?" He stopped. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. "She had work in the morning," I said. He didn't say anything, but he nodded slowly, like he was putting something away somewhere. I sat with him until about 5. They confirmed it was a bad bruise, not a fracture. Lucky. The doctor said he should stay off it, take it easy, come back if anything changed. Dad argued about this, predictably, and I told him to stop arguing, predictably, and the nurse looked at us like she'd seen this particular scene before. Gord came by around 7 in the morning, showed up with 2 coffees and a paper bag from Tim Hortons, and when I tried to say again how grateful I was, he waved his hand like I was embarrassing him. He sat with us for an hour. He and Dad talked about the Leafs, and about the fellow 2 streets over, who'd put up an addition without a permit, and about the price of propane. Normal things. I sat there and drank bad hospital coffee, and watched my father talk to his neighbor, and felt something I couldn't quite name. I drove Dad home, got him settled, checked the bathroom floor. The mat had bunched up at one corner, which was all it took. I laid it flat and put a grip strip under it and made a mental note to call about grab bars. I made him toast and eggs. We sat at the kitchen table and he ate, and I had more coffee, and for a while neither of us said anything. The morning light was coming through the window over the sink. Eventually he said, "How long has this been going on?" I knew what he meant. I said, "It's fine, Dad." He said, "It's not fine." I said, "I don't want to talk about it right now." He looked at me for a long moment. He's got this way of looking at you, my father. Hasn't changed since I was a boy. Like he's reading the fine print. He said, "You know, when your mother was sick, and I mean really sick, that last year, there was not a single day I wasn't there. Not because somebody told me to. Because she was mine, and I was hers. That's what it is." I didn't answer. He said, "A person who won't help you get to your father isn't a partner. She's a roommate who hasn't paid rent." I laughed despite myself. I said, "Dad." He said, "I'm just telling you what I see." I drove back to Barrie that afternoon, returned the rental. Got a cab home. The whole thing cost me about $400 between the cab and the rental and the gas, which I didn't mention to anyone. When I got in the house, my daughter-in-law was in the kitchen. She heard the door and came to the hallway. She said, "How is he?" I said, "He's okay. Bruised hip. Could have been worse." She said, "Good. That's good." Then she said, "You know, I've been thinking. Your dad should really look at moving somewhere more supported. It's not sustainable, him being all the way up there alone." I looked at her. I said, "Right," and I went to my room. My son came home from his shift that evening. I didn't say anything to him about it, not then. I didn't want to put him in the middle. He's my son and I love him, and whatever is between his wife and me is not something I want landing on him. He had enough to carry. But things have a way of coming out eventually. It came out about 3 weeks later, not through me. Through Gord, actually. Gord had apparently mentioned it to my cousin in passing, and my cousin mentioned it to my son. And my son came to me and asked me directly what happened that night. I told him. He was quiet for a long time. I mean, a long, long time. He sat at my kitchen table and stared at the surface of it and didn't say anything. I could see him working through it. He said, She told me she didn't want to be woken up. I said, I knocked, not woken up. He said, I know. That conversation between my son and his wife is not one I was part of. I don't know exactly what was said. What I know is that the following Sunday, she came and found me in the garage where I was going through some boxes. She stood in the doorway and said, I want to talk about what happened. I put down what I was holding. I turned around and I looked at her, and I waited. She said, I want you to know I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was tired and it was late and I panicked. I thought about that word. Panicked. I thought about what there was to panic about when someone asks to borrow a car. I said my father was on a bathroom floor. She said, I know that. I said, he's 77 years old. He was alone and he was hurt. She said, I understand. I said, do you? She didn't answer that. Then she said something that I've thought about many times since. She said, I feel like with your family, there's always something. There's always something I'm supposed to drop everything for. I looked at her. I said, that night was the first time I have ever asked you for anything. She opened her mouth. She closed it again. I said, I have never asked you for anything. Not since you moved in, not ever. That was the first time. And you said no. She looked down. She said, I'm sorry. I nodded. I turned back to the boxes. After a moment, I heard her go back inside. I stood there in the garage for a while after that. I'm not a person who carries grudges. I don't believe in it. Life is short, and the people who matter are too few to spend your time being angry at them. I know she's young. I know she didn't grow up in a family where you drop what you're doing and go. Some people aren't raised that way, and they have to learn it. I understand all of that. But there are moments that show you who someone is. Not the moments they're ready for, not the ones they've had time to prepare. The ones that happen at 11:47 on a Tuesday in February when nobody is watching, and it's cold and they're tired and it would be easier not to. That's the moment. That's the real one. My father is home. He's got grab bars in the bathroom now. I hired a contractor from up there to install them the following week. He's got a mat that doesn't move and a medical alert button he wears around his neck, though he pretends he hates it. He called me last Thursday just to tell me about a documentary he'd watched about the building of the St. Lawrence Seaway, and we talked for 40 minutes. He sounded good. He sounded like himself. Gord checks on him a couple of times a week. I still go up every few weeks. The drive is long and the highway is what it is, but I always feel something on the way home, something that settles in me, knowing he's okay in that house with the creaking back step and the ceramic frog by the door. My son and his wife are still with me. Things are what they are. My son is a good man and I'm proud of him. I believe they'll figure it out. As for me, I'm fine. I'm 63 years old and I've had enough road in my life to know that the people who show up are the ones you hold on to. And the ones who don't, well, you learn something from that too. I stood on that porch in the cold at midnight waiting for a cab, and I think about that sometimes. Not with anger, just as information. My father told me once, I was a teenager, we were in the truck going somewhere. I don't even remember where. He said, Neil, you'll know a person's character by what they do when it costs them something. He was right. He usually is. I closed the garage door that Sunday and went inside and put the kettle on and stood in my kitchen in my socks, and it was quiet, and I thought, I know exactly who showed up that night. And I thought, that's enough. That's enough to go on.